Hello everybody, and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. My goal with this channel is to introduce you to some new whiskeys that you may never have tried, or in today's example, one that we all know and love. Now, today we're going to be talking about the highest selling American whiskey in the world, a drink that we've all been on the wrong side of, Jack Daniels. Now, Jack Daniels is considered to be a straight bourbon. Now, in order to be a straight bourbon, you have to be aged for at least 2 years. Jack Daniels is also considered a Tennessee whiskey, which means that you have to be made in Tennessee, but also that you need to be filtered through a charcoal filtering system. Now, Jack Daniels does it through about 10 feet of charcoal, but it's pretty much the same thing that's going on in your fridge, in your water filter, or attached to your sink for whatever water filter you're dealing with. Anything that uses carbon to get rid of impurities or bad tastes. Now, Jack Daniels offers 3 main products. They've got the Old No. 7, they've got the Gentleman Jack, and then they also have another one called Single Barrel. I didn't bother buying the Single Barrel because for about 40-50 bucks or so, there's other whiskeys I prefer. Single Barrel tends to is made out of a single barrel. It's exactly as it sounds. Single Barrel makes about 250 bottles, and each one of those barrels and bottles ends up tasting slightly different than the next barrel. So it kind of didn't seem to make much sense. I'm going to be trying these in a second here, and if you had a different bottle than me, they might taste different, and it's kind of silly to bother talking about it. So anyway, speaking of which, if you have either one of these, pause the video, go grab it, and get a couple of glasses. If you've got both of them, make sure to get some water too, because it helps to cleanse the palate and whatnot. You want to make sure you get like bottled water instead of tap water if you're really going to be tasting whiskey for all of the flavors, because tap water can sometimes have impurities in it that can also throw off your taste buds. So why don't we go ahead and pour some of this Jack and talk a little bit about it. So obviously you see it's got an iconic bottle. Everybody knows this bottle. It's square. It's a little bit different. Now, I'd love to say that there was like a cool reason why this is square, but frankly, Jack Daniels ships so much of this stuff that a square bottle is just more efficient for shipping and packaging. So one cool thing is the label actually being black. It didn't used to always be black. When Jack Daniels died, they changed the label from more of an etching, like they used to etch into the bottle, and then they had like some green labels and a couple of other different things, but they changed it to black when he died as kind of an homage to him. So I think that's kind of neat. But anyway, why don't we go ahead and pour some. Now, the first thing you'll see is obviously color. It is 100% the color that you think of when you think of whiskey, or at least I do. Next, if you want to go ahead and smell it, you'll notice a couple of things. So go ahead and smell it, because I don't want to taint your experience. But all right, so I smell oak. Obviously, it's aged in an oak barrel, but I also get some hints of vanilla and a little bit of caramel. This is not a super complex whiskey. When you hear people start talking about random things that they smell in whiskey, it's usually more the connection between their sense of smell and some memory that they have. So if I was like, it smells like birthday cake, like, I don't know where the heck people are getting that. I totally use that example because I just read it the other day. Not in this particular whiskey, but if you're smelling birthday cake in a whiskey, I don't know what the heck you're smelling. But anyway, all right. You've probably had this whiskey a few times, probably a lot of times, usually probably with Coke or some other type of cola, probably Pepsi. If you've never tried it straight, I encourage you to go ahead and join me for a sip, and we'll talk about it in a sec. So, cheers. All right. So it's pretty mellow. I mean, it's not great for a sipping whiskey. This particular Old No. 7, but it is awesome as a mixer. Me personally, it's my go-to mixer if I'm especially if I'm planning on staying up late and drinking. I go Jack and Coke all the way. You get the caffeine and the alcohol. So one thing that people wonder is, why do they call it Old Number 7? Now, there's no official answer, but there's a couple of different stories, one of which seems probably the most plausible. But Jack Daniels, in the 1850s, he owned a giant distillery. He was born in 1850. In the, whatever, let's call it 1870. He owned a giant distillery, had tons of money, and he had a lot of girlfriends. People say he had 7 girlfriends, and named the whiskey after that. I think that's a little silly, but I think it's an awesome story. Less interesting one is it was just the 7th version of the mash that he came up with, and that's why he called it number 7, 7th recipe. The more believed story, I guess, or the more likely story, is that they entered Jack Daniels in the St. Louis World Fair. I think it was, sorry, I have it right here. Whatever. I don't have the year. So he entered it in the St. Louis World Fair years and years and years ago. He sent 7 barrels on a train, which then got lost. Totally disappeared, and ended up having to send another 7 barrels. So along the way, the railroad people ended up finding those 7 barrels and stamped them with Old Number 7 because they didn't want to confuse it with the new 7 barrels that were coming through. And personally, I think that's probably the most likely story, but either way, it's kind of neat. So, why don't we have another sip, just because it's a shame to waste any whiskey. I also tend to find that you taste a lot more the second time that you take a sip. That first sip, usually, depending on the whiskey, can be kind of like a shock to the mouth. So like this usually hits you a lot in the throat. You probably feel that. That's kind of an oaky taste, and you kind of taste it obviously a lot on your tongue, but it's just a very even flavor all the way back. All right, let's put this one aside for now. We're going to go over to the Gentleman Jack. So, Gentleman Jack was introduced in 1988, so quite a ways away from the first introduction of Old Number 7. Now, the difference I was mentioning about this is that it is distilled through that charcoal twice. So they distill it, they age it, and then they distill it again. You're going to notice that this one has a considerably different taste than this. Before I have this, I'm going to have a sip of water though, because I want to just cleanse the palate. Alright, so go ahead and give it a smell. It's going to be about the same as far as smell goes, except much more mild. Pretty much running it through that charcoal just totally smooths this one out. I actually don't mind this one as a sipping whiskey. Alright, go ahead and give it a shot. It's much better. And actually I find that it kind of gives like an all around the mouth feel. It's, or taste I guess. It's just way smoother. This is a great whiskey to start off with if you've never really had whiskey and you want to try something a little bit more refined than this. If you order this, you could have that at a bar, you could have it neat, and it's not going to make you cough or make you look kind of whatever. You're not going to want to dump some Coke in it after a couple of sips. So anyway, I highly suggest you start off with this one. So now let's talk about the other whiskey I haven't really talked much about, the single barrel. As I mentioned, it all comes from the same barrel, but kind of a neat thing. So the single barrels are stored up in the highest like rafters of the warehouses, and they call it the Angel's Roost. Now you've probably heard of the term Angel's Cut or Angel's Envy or Devil's Cut. Now Angel's Cut is basically as whiskey ages, some of it evaporates through the barrel or soaks into the wood, and basically it gets lost. You can, you age a barrel for 20 years or so, you can open up that barrel and be missing like 2/3 to even like a half of the entire contents of the barrel. That's part of the reason that really old whiskeys tend to cost a lot, is because they lose it, Like it's one thing to age it that far, but after 20 years, you now have half the whiskey that you would have had if you opened it up in 5 years or so. Anyway, so they have it up in the Angel's Roost, and it's the hottest part of the warehouse, and this evaporates the most. And after a number of years, they open them up and they pour the barrel out into about 250 bottles, and that's a whole vintage, and they even mark them on the bottle. So anyway, that's the single barrel. That's the only one I don't have here. So while you're enjoying your whiskeys, let me tell you a little bit more about Jack Daniels as a person. So first of all, his name's not Jack Daniels. It's Jasper Newton Daniel. He was born in about 1850. They're not quite sure when he was born. I guess back in the 1800s or so, mid-1800s, you had to pay to have your birth certificate at all. So a lot of people just didn't do it. Now, he was one of like 13 kids, so it kind of makes sense that they probably wouldn't have done it for all of them. But either way, the place where his birth certificate would have been stored caught on fire and burned down, so we don't know if he even had one. Anyway, 1850. So when he was about 7 or so, 1857, he ended up working at a general store with this guy, Daniel Houston Call, I believe it was. And Daniel Houston Call owned a general store after he fought in the Civil War. So he had a distillery out back, which a lot of general stores would, and he also had a farm that kind of helped supply. So he ended up teaching Jasper Daniel, I'll just call him Jack Daniels because that's how you know, Jack Daniels how to distill whiskey. So by the time he was like 13, he already kind of knew a whole lot of stuff, and Daniel Houston decided that he was done distilling whiskey. He ended up kind of meeting this, what do they call him? Ended up meeting a woman who was like into temperance. She was really promoting temperance, and basically said, you need to either not do whiskey or not sell whiskey or be like a religious man. He had decided that, he was a minister anyway, so he was like, all right, I gotta go be a religious guy, gotta stop making whiskey. He ended up selling the still to Jack Daniels, who then, obviously did a heck of a lot with it. So by the time he was like 16, he ended up moving from that general store about 5 miles or so down the road to this spring. It's a cave, and actually that's where all the water for Jack Daniels comes from, even till today. So they're making millions and millions and millions of these bottles every single year, and like this one spring is supplying all the water for them. So it's got to be gigantic. I've personally never seen it. I've been to Tennessee, but I didn't. I was a little younger. I didn't really care about whiskey at the time. So if I ever make it back there, I'm definitely gonna go check it out. But anyway, kind of funny thing, Jack Daniels, when he was, it was like 1911 or so, he used to have this safe in his office, and he was always having trouble opening it. I guess the combination was a pain in the butt or something, and so his nephew, Lem Motlow, he ended up actually inheriting the distillery, but he would come by and he would open up the safe for Jack Daniels. So Jack was trying to open it up, couldn't open it up, and got really frustrated and kicked it, broke his toe. Ended up getting an infection, that kind of sucks, but ended up getting blood poisoning and dying from it. And Jack Daniels' official biographer says that story is not true. I personally have seen a lot of people drinking Jack Daniels, and I know their propensity for hitting things, and I totally believe that it's true. Anyway, so that's how Jack Daniels ended up dying. He ended up giving the still down to a couple of his nephews because he never had any kids, and Lem Motlow was one of his nephews. Ended up buying it from his brother and taking it for the next like 40 years or so. It's now owned by a larger company, and who cares? Whatever. It is what it is. They still make a great product. So anyway, that's pretty much the story of Jack Daniels. That's about all the information I got. It's been cool drinking with you. And if you like this video, like and subscribe. I plan on making more. I'm going to try to do one every like week or two. The next video I'm going to do, in case you feel like going out and buying a bottle, is Jameson. So I'm going to probably get a few more of these and try a few different kinds. So I hope you can join me in a couple of weeks. And yeah, that's about it. So thanks for joining me. Cheers.